Hello everybody. In this session, we are going to talk about classes and objects. We'll start by taking a preliminary look at a class. Okay, we look at the source code. A class has got attributes and methods. We are going to show you an example very quickly. Now, after this session, you are not expected to be able to write a class. So just keep that in mind because that will be in a later session. You learn how to write a class in a later session. For now, you are supposed to appreciate. Just take a look at a class and get a rough idea what it's all about. Because we are going to learn how to use a class to create an object and to use the objects. Hold on to writing a class. After that, we are going to look at the different types of methods. Now, a class has got attributes and methods can be categorized into two main groups: constructors and other methods. Okay, you see some methods called getters and setters. These are considered these are placed in a second category of methods called other methods. And lastly, before we end this session, I'm going to talk about the difference between a class and an object. Okay, let's start with by looking at the source code of a class. Now, I've written a class called human. So this will be stored in human.java, okay, on your hard disk. The class name is here. All right, by convention, a class name starts with a capital letter. Okay, that's convention, which means that if you write a class which starts with a small h, you name it human.java with a small h in front, it will compile, it can be used, but convention dictates that class names should start with a capital letter, and I don't see any good reason to deviate from this this practice. The class code starts here and ends here on line 43. So everything in between, which means all these lines, will be part of your class, the meat inside your class. All right. Now, before we look at the content of the class, I must say that a class consists of two things. A class can consist of attributes, any number of attributes, and methods. Any number of methods. You can have a class with 100 methods and 0 attributes, or you can have a class with 2 attributes and 10 methods. You can have a class with 0 attributes and 0 methods. Although you'll be asking, why do we have such a class in the first place? The discussion of that is out of scope. There are such classes actually. So, back to our source code. Now, these are the attributes in the human class. And these are the methods. One method, two method, the third method, the fourth method, fifth method, and the sixth method. This class called human has got two attributes, savings and name, and 6 methods. Now, it is possible to put your attributes at the bottom. For example, I can shift them to the bottom. This will work, this will compile, but again, convention dictates that attributes should be placed in front. Alright? Attributes should be placed in front. Why? Because that's usually where other readers of your code will be looking for attributes. So no good reason why you want to place attributes at the middle or bottom of your class. Now, let's take a look at these two methods. Like what I've said just now, these two methods are what we call constructors, very special methods. And what's so special about constructor? In the first place, how do you recognize that this is a constructor and this is a constructor? Clue number one, a constructor's name is the same as the name of the class it is found in. So the name of the class is human, and the name of this method is human, hence this is a constructor. Look at the name of the second method. It is also constructor. It is also human, which means that this is a constructor. Second clue, it has no return type. Check this out. No return type. Let's look at any other method. For example, get savings. It has a return type. it returns an integer if it's called. Set name is another method. It has it has a return type. Void. Void means the method does not return anything. The return type is void. That means the method does not return anything. On the other hand, constructors have no return types. You can't even put void there. If you try to put void there, it won't compile. The code won't compile because constructors cannot have return types. A constructor can't return. You can't even put void there. So just by looking at these two clues, you know that this is a constructor and this is a constructor. Okay, you can have any number of constructors in a class. You need not have a constructor if you don't want to, which means that in the first place, I mentioned just now that you need not have any method in the first place. A class can be empty. So what's so special about constructor? I mean, you know how to identify a constructor now, but what is so special? Hold on to that. We'll talk about that in the next session when we talk about using the new keyword. All right. Now let's look at the other methods. Now this is a method called getSavings. It takes in nothing and returns an integer. This is a method called getName. It takes in nothing and returns a string. These methods are usually what we call getter methods. Obvious, right? From the name, getSavings, getName. Now, getter methods usually do not take in anything, but they usually return the value of an attribute. So getSavings will return the value stored in savings. Now, savings is actually an attribute in a human class. It is an int. It stores a number. So getSavings returns an int, which is the value stored in savings. What about getName? GetName returns the name, the value stored in name, which happens to be a string. If you look at the attribute declaration, name is a string, so getName returns a string. It makes a lot of sense. So these methods are what we call getter methods, also known as assessor methods, because you use these methods to assess the value of an attribute. Right? So getters are methods. What about this method? This method is what we call a setter. Set name. Now set name is called when you want to change the value stored in an attribute. In this case, you want to change the value of name. So set name. And you need to pass in one value. That's the value of the new name. And what happens in the set name method is usually they will just assign whatever you have passed in to the attribute name, so that the old value is dumped and name stores a new value. Setters usually return nothing. What's there to return? Usually, when I call set name, I just pass in a new name, and name gets changed. That's it. Full stop. It returns. There's no value to be returned. Now there's no need for all classes to have setters and getters. In this particular example, human, I've got a getter for name, I've got a getter for savings, and one setter, the setter for name. Alright, you need not provide getters and setters for all your attributes at all. You provide them only when you need them. By the way, let's not talk about public. You notice that all my methods are public. Okay, we'll talk about private and public, the difference between private and public methods. Okay, in another session. For now, just put the word public in front. Okay, we'll move on to that down the road. Now there is another method here, the sixth method in human, called pay. All right, pay takes in an attribute, an integer, and it returns nothing. So what pay does is it changes the value of savings by increasing the value by p. P is whatever is passed in. So when I call pay and I pass in 6, savings will be the original value of savings plus 6. So when I call the pay method, the savings of human will increase, okay, by whatever value I pass in. Okay, so back to the diagram. What I've shown, a class with 2 attributes and 6 methods. And methods here include constructors as well as, other methods. And of course, other methods will include getters and setters and the pay method and whatever method you want to write. Okay, now, like what I've said just now, there's no need after this session for you guys to be able to write this code. We'll have a later session to review this again. Okay. So let's look at our objective. We have taken a very cursory, look at a class. A class has got attributes and methods, and we talked about constructors as well as other methods. And getters and setters are very special. Are methods which are placed into the other methods category. Okay, and they are used to either retrieve or change the value of a attribute. Now, getters are also known as accessors. Setters are also known as mutators because they mutate the value of an attribute. Okay, they do not need, they are optional. All these methods are optional. We move on to point number 3. What is the difference between a class and an object? Now, this is very important, conceptually important. If you do not understand this, it's so difficult to write anything. Okay, we writing stuff you don't understand. So what is the difference between a class and a method? A class and an object. Now, a class can be viewed as a template. Now, what you have seen just now, human.java, is the definition. This stuff here is the definition. This whole piece of code is a definition of the human class. You have written a class. You have not written an object. You have written a definition of the human class. On the other hand, an object is created from a template. An object is created from a class. So from one class, you can create many objects. Object, object, object. So from the human class, which you have just seen, I can create any number of human objects. Alright, you will learn how to do this in the next session. We use the new new, the new keyword, to create an object from a class. Let me give another example. Some of you guys love jelly or jello. Alright, Americans call it jello. So I've drawn on the screen a jelly mold. Okay, you can buy this. It's made of plastic, made of metal. And what happens is you pour in liquid syrup, okay, or jelly, whatever that stuff. And after 15 minutes, you can take the piece of jelly out, pour in some more liquid, and after 5 or 10 minutes, take the piece of jelly out. Okay, so in this example, from the single mold or the single jelly template, I've created 3 pieces of jelly. So this thing is a class, the jelly class. And all these are actually jelly objects. Jelly object 1, jelly object 2, and jelly object 3. So using a class, you can create any number of, in this case, jelly objects. And because they came from the same mold or the same template, these jelly objects will be similar. What do I mean by that? Okay, from the human class, you create human objects. Because the human class has got 2 attributes, name and savings, right? Yep, name and savings. Hence, all human objects created from this human class will have a name and will have savings, a value for savings. We are going to look at that again down the road. So for now, this will become clearer when we look at examples. For now, just remember that the class is a template which can be used to create any number of objects. Another point, you hear the word instance being used quite frequently. An instance is simply another word for object. They mean the same thing, they can be used interchangeably. So when I say I create 3 instances from the human class, I mean I create 3 objects from the human class, 3 human objects or 3 human instances. So sometimes you see the word instantiation. Instantiation is the process of creating an object or creating an instance. So don't be afraid of this term, which you can't even find in the English dictionary. Instantiation is just the process of creating an object from a class. You can only create an object from a class. So that's all. Let me see, did I miss out anything? That's the main difference between a class and an object. And next session, we'll use the new keyword to do precisely that, the instantiation.